Hi guys, welcome to 1.4 in Foundations of Environmental Systems and Societies. Today we're going to talk about sustainability. And I want to start with a simple question. What does it mean to be sustainable? When you think about sustainability, what does that mean to you? Do you consider your life to be sustainable, your lifestyle to be sustainable? Do you think, like this quote up here says, that you would be able to leave a good world for your children? How are you measuring your own sustainability? So take a minute to think about that. And I want to give you a graphic to help you as you consider that question. This is some information put together, and I'm sort of covering up some of what's important here in terms of the years. But this is a graphic put together about how many planets we need to sustain the consumption that goes on from the human populations on our Earth. If we continue in business as usual for the next 30 years or so, this 2-planet mark represents the year 2030. We would need double the amount of space that we have to maintain our consumption habits. If we right now were to reduce carbon emissions by 30%, we could get back to just a planet and a half by that point. So it's likely that if you live in the first world and do anything that produces carbon emissions, your lifestyle is not, in fact, that sustainable. And we're going to take a look at what exactly that means in the rest of this class. So when we talk about sustainability, that's an important word to be able to define in environmental systems and societies. We are talking about the use and management, oopsies, all that stuff popped up. We are talking about the use and management of resources that allows for full natural replacement of the resources exploited and full recovery of ecosystems affected by their extraction and use. So basically, in a sustainable system, anything that you take out, you are giving it the opportunity to grow back in, or you are replacing it. A lot of times now, when we look at what the world is going to be like in the future, we talk about sustainable development. And that means putting our resource consumption at a level that meets the needs of the present without compromising the abilities of future generations to meet their own needs. So when we talk about sustainable development, that's central to our understanding of sustainability. Are we meeting our own needs and not compromising the needs of future generations in doing that? When we look at our resource use, we talk about two things. We talk about natural capital and we talk about natural income. And the next slide has a little bit more information on both of those concepts. So when we look at natural capital, those are the goods and services that are provided by nature. So that's stuff like the amount of fish in the ocean, the amount of clean water in underground reservoirs. A lot of times, as anthropocentric or technocentric individuals, we look at those sources of natural capital in terms of the natural income that they are going to be able to produce for us. So how much money, how much yield do we make from those resources? We have a tendency to put the capital resources, the capital income, ahead of other ways of measuring natural income. And that has led us into a sort of dangerous situation where we're really drastically overexploiting world resources. And there's been some research done on this. The Millennium Ecosystem Assessment was a research program that focused on what was going on in our world and how ecosystems were changing. It started in 2001, and it dug up some really sad information. These are some of the key facts that were discovered in the original Millennium Ecosystem Assessment. It's not looking good for the sustainability of ecosystems. 60% of world ecosystems have been degraded, 25% of land surface is cultivated, and at that point, 25% of fish stocks were overharvested. That number has gotten a lot worse. We did not follow a lot of these recommendations. And at this point, it's estimated that closer to 75% of fish stocks are fished either at or above capacity. And our sustainability on this planet is becoming a really serious problem. And I think that that has to do with a really interesting phenomenon called the tragedy of the commons. So you might have heard of the tragedy of the commons before if you take an econ class. Tragedy of the commons is basically the idea, you can see it here, if there's a common resource, everyone is going to just take advantage of the resource as much as they can for as long as they can, because they don't think that their individual use of the resource, let's say that 2 of these sheep belong to just one individual, these 2 sheep by themselves aren't going to ruin this whole pasture. But when everybody takes their 2 sheep or their 3 sheep and puts them out in the pasture with no control, thinking that just their individual use isn't going to ruin the pasture, eventually the whole pasture gets ruined. When you have carefully controlled individual resource use, like if each owner has to keep their sheep in one pen and they know they're the only one using it, that's when you see more sustainable resource use, because people don't want to be responsible for other people's resource use. They only want to be responsible for their own resource use. And that leads in to a more individual view of sustainability. What we need, though, is a global view of sustainability, and we need it fast. So after this Millennium ecosystem assessment happened, the UN developed something that they called the Millennium Development Goals, and they split up what they thought was most important to address in terms of shared resource use into 8 categories: eradicating extreme poverty and hunger, achieving universal primary education, gender equality, reducing child mortality, improving maternal health, combating diseases, ensuring environmental sustainability, and this last thing, ensuring a global partnership for development. And the UN tries to work towards this. We'll get into this more in topic 3 about biodiversity and conservation. It's difficult for the UN to have a lot of legislative chops because they can find people that are involved in the UN, but they don't have a really final say on what is going to happen in terms of people being punished for not being sustainable in their actions. So it's difficult to persuade whole societies to move towards sustainability. And that's a topic that we're going to keep coming back to over and over and over again in this course. If you're interested in your own personal sustainability, you can calculate what's called your ecological footprint. And that has to do, it's a model that has to do with estimating your demand on your environment. It looks at how much carbon you use, how much food you consume, how much water you consume, and how much land you use. If this hyperlink doesn't work, it's the WWF Ecological Footprint Calculator, the World Wildlife Fund Ecological Footprint Calculator. You can Google it, and it gives you a really good idea of how many resources you're using versus how many resources we have available. And at the end, it will even give you an estimate of how many planets you use based on the resource consumption that you have. So that is it for this section on sustainability. It is a theme that we're going to keep coming back to over and over again throughout the course. So don't feel like we're done with sustainability. But I want to move into the homework assignment for this section. If you're following along in the textbook, you can go ahead and read pages 41 to 44. And we are going to do another long writing practice question, another paper 2, section B, part C response. So remember, these responses are worth 9 points. And the question that I want you to try to answer is, to what extent is current human existence sustainable? Remember, in these responses, you want to make sure that you are including an introduction. Oopsies, this keeps happening. You want to make sure that you are including an introduction, evidence in favor of your argument, counter evidence, and a conclusion. So you can think of it like a 4-paragraph essay. In that essay, you should be giving specific examples of what you're talking about, So you could talk about things like the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment. You could talk about specific examples of places that are or are not sustainable. And you should be also using course vocabulary, succinct course vocabulary as much as possible. So you could define the term sustainable. You could talk about sustainable development. You could do all of those things through the course of your essay. Use those vocabulary words. So take a crack at writing a little essay. In the review video, we will go over some mark scheme points, things that you could have discussed in your essay response. And whenever you're ready, I'll see you there.